But why wasn't that done by the World Health Organization? Why wasn't that done 20 years ago? Why wasn't it done after SARS or after swine flu or indeed after Ebola just 5 years ago? And let's look at what the World Health Organization has been doing during that time. It's been scolding us for being too fat or smoking too many cigarettes or whatever it might be.
Whatever politically favorable things that are well inside the Overton window, it's okay to point the finger and say, you right over there are doing bad. I mean, we watched it in the United States. They've been participating in calling things that are completely safe maybe potentially causing cancer, and then starting multi-billion-dollar lawsuits over in the U.S. So all this stuff about glyphosate being carcinogenic or smoked meats or all these things, that's what the WHO has been doing. They're supposed to be on guard, and they haven't been.
Oh, my God, I've only just remembered that the International Agency for Research on Cancer, who are the people making a fuss about glyphosate, they're a WHO agency.
Yeah, that's right. And we spent a whole lot of time in the United States being like, hey, those guys over there, they're not using science to make these decisions. They're doing something else. And now it's come home to roost in a global pandemic.
I'll give you another example. They've been campaigning furiously against vaping, against electronic cigarettes. Demanding that countries ban them, congratulating India on bringing in a ban against them most recently. And they've done so really quite mendaciously. So they actually had to withdraw a claim that they made just about 2 months ago that vaping was dangerous because it contained antifreeze. And this is just not true. I mean, they were confusing two different chemicals, both of which have the word glycol in them, but are completely different chemicals used for completely different purposes. So, but worse than that, Margaret Chan was Director General of the World Health Organization. And in 2015, at the very height of the Ebola epidemic in West Africa, she made a speech saying that vaping was one of the great threats to world health.
Oh, God.
And she gave her excuses for not attending an Ebola conference so that she could attend one on how to ban vaping instead. Now, if that's not Marie Antoinette telling the poor to eat cakes, well, it's not a very good analogy, but you know what I mean.
Well, I mean, my experience with international organizations, I worked at the World Bank. And there you are trying to eradicate poverty. That is its supposed mission. And I worked and got all the way up into the area that planned the leadership conferences where the president and the managing directors and the sector directors and the country directors would all come together. And it was only when I got to the top of the world at the international organizations that I realized these people are political sycophants. They are there because they've done political favors inside of the country for their government. They get to this body, and then whoever has the money, whoever controls the access to their country, not to the international organization, right, that's who they serve. And it is corruption at the deepest debased level that I ever saw anything. And I actually had my life crushed. I had to leave and move to St. Louis because of it.
Well done you. And the perfect example of this is the way the World Health Organization behaved during the Ebola epidemic of 2014-15, because an NGO called Médecins Sans Frontières raised the alarm and said this crisis, this Ebola crisis in West Africa is getting out of control. It's a real problem. And they were savaged by the World Health Organization. How dare you say it's out of control? We know exactly what we're doing. It's fine. Now, at that stage, there were only a few hundred cases. Within months, there were thousands of cases. And even the World Health Organization was forced to admit that it was out of control. Now, why were they so negative about Médecins Sans Frontières raising the alarm?
For the U.S., that's Doctors Without Borders is the equivalent kind of thing.
Exactly. Yes. Sorry, same organization. And the answer is because the World Health Organization was listening to its country representatives who were saying, what are these NGOs doing? We're in charge of health. How dare they ring the alarm bell before we do? We haven't noticed a problem. We're not going to make a crisis out of it. Now, the reason I can say this without fear of, being wrong is because the World Health Organization organized an inquiry into its own behavior over Ebola, which was a good thing to do. And it came up with very damning conclusions that its own behavior had slowed the response to this epidemic and had actually got in the way rather than helped. Now, okay, fine. They fessed up and admitted that they'd got things wrong, so that's fine, isn't it? But did they learn? No, because look at what they did in this case. They spent January repeating Chinese assertions that this was not transmissible human to human as late as the 24th of January. That's extraordinary.
Yeah, Twitter didn't even believe it by then.
The Taiwanese raised the alarm about human to human transmission based on what they were hearing about doctors getting infected in Wuhan on the 30th of December, nearly 4 weeks before. But of course, the Taiwanese must not be listened to in the World Health Organization because they're not a member of it, at the insistence of China, who are big funders of the World Health Organization.
Give a little bit of more background for people that aren't familiar with East Asia. What's going on with China's relationship with Taiwan from your perspective?
Well, Taiwan was where Chiang Kai-shek retreated when Mao Zedong defeated him on the mainland. And Mao Zedong was never able to invade the island of Formosa and kick Chiang Kai-shek out. So his regime became the democratic version, the non-communist version of China, just on this one relatively small island. Now, decades went by and Taiwan basically behaved like a separate independent country, and most of the rest of the world eventually recognized it as such. The Chinese never did, but they came to a fairly peaceable accommodation with it until recent years when Xi Jinping changed that policy and said, no, we want to treat them as the enemy again.
And they go all around the world, and all the developing countries that want to get aid from China, one of the contingencies is don't recognize that Taiwan exists.
Right.
That goes on in Costa Rica. I'm sure that's going on in Africa. That is the policy.
And you'll notice there was a hilarious, although shocking, television interview that a reporter in Hong Kong did with Bruce Aylward, the deputy head of the World Health Organization. And she said, what do you think about what Taiwan is doing to prevent the epidemic? And he pretended not to hear the question. Well, maybe he didn't hear the question. But when she repeated the question, he said, no, I don't want you to repeat the question. Let's move on to another question, which was a kind of weird thing to say. And when she did repeat the question anyway, the connection was lost. Click. She re-established the connection and asked the question again.
And the question was, what does the WHO think about the Taiwanese believing that there is person-to-person contact?
Well, no, it was what does the World Health Organization think about the Taiwanese strategy to control the virus, which has been very successful on the whole. That was all it was. And in his answer, he answered about China. He can't use the word Taiwan if he works for the World Health Organization.
Wow.
Now, he's since stepped down because of the embarrassment over this, but it's an indication, because again, a week after they said there was no human-to-human transmission, China eventually admitted there was, and Taiwan, the World Health Organization then sent people to China, and they visited Wuhan and they visited Beijing, and they came away with some extremely sycophantic remarks about how marvelously the Chinese were managing it, how generous they were hosting this visit and all this. It was a bit odd, it's a sort of strange way to behave. And one has to realize that Dr. Tedros, who is the current Director General of the World Health Organization, was the former Foreign Minister and Health Minister of Ethiopia, and was part of an organization called the Tigray Liberation Front, which was a Marxist insurgency that took over Ethiopia and built Ethiopia into a very successful economy, but a very authoritarian one, and did so with a huge amount of Chinese backing and Chinese help. So, I don't want to exaggerate this. It's a There's lots of angles to this, but at the end of this, we have to say, why is an international body, part of the United Nations, so much at fault for failing to prepare us for a pandemic in the first place, and then failing to raise the alarm when the pandemic started? And could it have something to do with its very subservient relationship with one donor country in particular, which is an authoritarian regime that has very strong views about how it should be, how things should be managed in terms of presentation. And the Chinese government itself has got very strong questions to ask about why it was so slow in admitting the problem, and indeed in why it wasn't. I think this is an even more serious question, why it did so little to get rid of the trade in wildlife products, in live wildlife products in markets all across China.